So my goal today is to give you information about 1031 exchanges, and not too in depth, because this can, I get to talk to. I've done 6.5 hour lectures on this stuff to attorneys before, so I'm definitely not going to bore you with that. But we're definitely going to go over the basic rules of exchanges, how it can be used. Some of you have primary residences that are highly appreciated. Wonder how to combine that. Some things to be careful about when it comes to second homes, vacation homes, that kind of stuff. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about strategies for exchanges, especially if you're looking for exit strategies. So let's start at the beginning. What is a 1031 exchange? 1031 just refers to the section of the tax code that allows you to sell investment real estate, buy replacement investment real estate, and in doing so, you get to defer paying taxes on the profit that you've made. So what does that mean in English? You got a rental house, been renting it for the last 10 years. You want to sell that and buy a fourplex. So you list the property. At the close of escrow, the funds come to what's called the intermediary. That's us. You then go find that fourplex you want to buy. You put the money into escrow and the property closes. In the eyes of the IRS, you sold a piece of investment real estate. You bought a piece of investment real estate. And because you never touched the money, because we had it, you get to defer paying taxes on the profit. Now, important word there, defer, not eliminate, okay? So you sell the rental house to buy a fourplex. Later you sell the fourplex and do another exchange and buy a sixplex. Now you're sick of real estate and you say, the hell with it, I'm just gonna sell the real estate and pay the taxes. Well, when you do, you pay taxes from the house, the fourplex, and the sixplex. You are just deferring the taxes. The common question here is, why bother? Why bother doing an exchange if I'm going to have to pay the tax man anyway? There are two reasons, though, that I think it's very important for you to think about doing an exchange. Number one, would you prefer to pay your taxes today or tomorrow? For most people, the answer is going to be tomorrow. The way I look at it is this. If you make $300,000 of profit on something and you got to pay $100 to the government, now you only got $200 to reinvest. But because you get to do the exchange, you get to reinvest all $300. And that $100,000 that you're not giving the government yet, you get to use that to buy more real estate. But the real reason to do the exchange is because when do you really want to pay your taxes? Well, me, never, okay? And guess what? You don't have to. Because ultimately, sadly, one day we're all gonna die. And when you die, you win. Well, to be honest, when you die, your kids win. Because when you die, your heirs get what's called the step up in tax basis, and all of your capital gains are wiped away. Make sure we're all on the same page here. I bought a property many, many years ago for $100,000. Today it's worth $1 million. If I sell it, I have to pay $900,000 in taxes on $900,000. But the day I die, whoever inherits the property from me, their basis is the value of the property at my time of death. So if your kids are like mine, day after my funeral, they're selling everything. It was worth $1 million when I died, that becomes their basis. They sell it right away. They have zero capital gain, zero depreciation recapture, zero taxes to pay that you would have had to pay had you bought the property when you were still alive. That's really the beauty of the 1031, is ultimately, hopefully, nobody ever has to pay the taxes. So anyway, that's my thought about why doing the exchange is still worth it as long as you are still okay with buying investment real estate. Now, there's a common term in exchanges that's very misunderstood. The term is like kind. What you sell, what you buy have to be like kind. Most people, when they hear this, think, well, I have a yellow house on the street corner. Do I have to buy another yellow house on the street corner? No. Any kind of investment real estate can be exchanged with any other kind of investment real estate anywhere in the country. You can sell a rental house and buy a shopping center. You can sell a farm and buy a fourplex. You can sell bare land and buy an apartment building or a shopping center or a farm, any kind of investment real estate for any other kind, anywhere in the United States. So selling in California, buying in Oregon, buying in Hawaii, buying in Texas, buying in Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, all perfectly okay. As long as it's within the United States, you can exchange there as long as what you're selling and what you're buying are investment real estate. You can exchange there also. So What about my primary residence? My primary residence isn't investment real estate. You're right. Your primary residence is under a different section of the tax code. It's under section 121. And that's the section that says if you lived in the property 2 of the last 5 years, you get to keep an automatic amount of gain tax-free. If you're single, $250,000. If you're married, $500,000. Now, mind you, this law was put in 1997, and the numbers haven't changed since 1997. Back even in 1997, that was a lot of money in your house, even in San Mateo County. The reality, though, is in today, ain't so much. So a lot of people have way more than $500,000 gain in their primary residence. Well, is there anything else you can do if you don't want to pay taxes? Yeah, there are 2 things you could do. Number 1, does any portion of your property qualify as investment? Do you rent out the basement? Do you have an ADU? Do you have a home office? Jean might have a home office at her house. And if she is declaring, I'll make up a number, 20% of her house as being a home office, and she is telling the IRS that 20% of her house is business real estate, and therefore she can do an exchange on 20% of her sales price. So this is something to consider. Is there any portion of your property today that you are already declaring to the IRS to be business or investment property? Or is there something that would qualify, but you haven't been, but maybe you should be, because now you're going to be able to do that? There used to be a real big spin against home offices, and people were afraid of declaring home office on tax returns because it used to be a very big target for audits. It's not anymore. As a matter of fact, the IRS has made it easier for more of your house to qualify now. So don't be afraid of it if your house truly does qualify. The reality, though, is for most of us, including me, we don't, our house does not, I do not have a home office. I do not have an ADU. My gain on my property is about $500,000. What's my choice? For me, move out. Turn your house into a rental property. Now, after you've been renting it for a couple of years, is your house now an investment? Yes, it is. Is your house still a primary residence? Yes, it is. Because it still meets the criteria of having lived in the property 2 of the last 5 years. And because of that, you get to take advantage of both tax rules at the same time. So let's say your house is worth $2 million and you're married, you get to keep $500,000 and the remaining $1.5 million go into the exchange. Now, a couple of caveats here. This does not work if you need your money to go buy a bigger house. But if you're moving to a lower end area, or you can move into your second home, or you're moving into a senior facility or senior living, okay? This is a very common strategy for people who are looking to downsize, to get out of their property, but they have other places to go live or the financial flexibility to go buy another place, and it still allows them to turn this house into a rental. Again, the key here is you need to rent it for long enough for the IRS to consider it an investment. 2 years is considered to be safe, but the tax code does not say it has to be 2 years. So exactly how long you want to rent it for, that's something to discuss with your accountant. The other thing to be careful about this is a lot of people think they just have to reinvest their excess profit. No, you only get to keep the exemption. Everything else, including your basis, has to go into the exchange. So if you sell your house for $5 million and you're single, you get $250, and the remaining $4.75 has to go into the 1031 if you want to defer all of your taxes. We'll talk about the dollars a little bit later, but this strategy here is something that I probably set up a couple of these every single week, and they're almost always on the peninsula. I'd say from San Francisco to San Jose, and this is a very common tax strategy locally because a lot of people have hundreds of thousands, often millions of dollars of gain above their exemption, and they do not want to be writing 6 or sometimes 7-figure checks to the government for taxes. Great strategy here. All right, so what other properties don't qualify for exchanges? Well, flipping real estate. If you buy a property, fix it up and sell it to the IRS, that's considered to be a job. It's not considered to be investment. It's considered to be a property purchased for resale, not for investment purposes. Similarly, development is not considered to be investment real estate. You buy a piece of land, you build a house on it, you sell it, you're a developer. That's not investment real estate. The other kind is second homes. Second homes are not investment real estate. Now, what do we mean by second homes? Well, that house on the beach that you like to go to on weekends. Well, now, can a property be used as a vacation rental? Well, yes, but second homes themselves are not. So where we really trip up people here is a lot of people own real estate that they're letting their children live in, or their mother-in-law lives there, right? Never your mother, it's always your mother-in-law that lives there. And if you're having a family member live in the property and you are not charging them market rate rent, it's not investment real estate. So if you finally get a chance to kick the kid out, to tell the kid, hey, I got to charge you market rate rent, because if I don't, when we sell this house, I'm going to have a ton of money in taxes. So that's an important thing. If you have a family member living in property, make sure you're treating them like a regular tenant. Now, I do want to distinguish a second home from a vacation rental. Let's say you got a place in Hawaii, you rent it out for, you go there for a couple of weeks per year, and when you're not there, you rent it out. Vacation rentals do qualify, but the IRS has given us a black and white definition. This is referred to as a safe harbor definition. When you hear the IRS use the term safe harbor, what they're referring to is essentially, if you follow these rules, we can't audit you. You will win. We won't even try. And the safe harbor definition of a vacation rental is a property that you only have to rent out 2 weeks per year. But more importantly, your personal use of the property cannot be more than 2 weeks per year. And you need to do this for 2 years. So if you have a second home and you're saying, well, I don't really want it anymore, I'm thinking about selling it, maybe I should convert it to a vacation rental, then this is basically the recipe. For 2 years, you rent it for at least a couple weeks, you don't use it for more than a couple weeks. At the end of the 2 years, you have met the safe harbor definition and can now do an exchange. Similarly, I have clients who want to go buy a property that ultimately is going to become their second home, or maybe even their primary residence. This is the strategy. For the first 2 years, treat it like, meet this criteria of vacation rental. After 2 years, you can pretty much do whatever you want with the property, including moving into it. Note that when you move into the property, there is no tax due when you move in. If you ever sell the property, there will be taxes due, but not when you move into the property. So again, vacation rentals, great thing to know about. So essentially, that's what we're talking about with investment real estate. Is primarily real estate that you're getting rental income from, real estate that you are running a business from. Bare land is really the one outlier in there. Bare land is considered to be investment because it's considered to be held for appreciation purposes. But other than that, any investment real estate for any other kind of investment real estate.
Ron, if I can interject with a few questions.
Please.
So you mentioned not a flip, flips are not included, but what happens if someone buys an investment property and they are intending it as an investment property, but decide they don't like it for whatever reason and end up having to sell it, say within 6 months or a year? Does that cause a problem? Can you see that?
Well, as your intermediary, all I'm going to tell you is you better have a good accountant. Because the question there is, if you own a property for 3 months or 6 months and you sell it, the IRS could audit you, and their question they're going to ask is, did you flip this property? And if you have a valid, provable rationale for having owned this property a short amount of time, then you may be okay. So what I say is, does your accountant feel that he or she can defend you to the IRS? I mean, I think a lot of it also has to do with your history. If you do this 4 times in a row, the IRS will not believe you.
Sure.
If you've held all of your properties for 20 years and you held one for 6 months, you probably can show that you probably have less to prove to the IRS than the rest. But the key is, as a rule, 2 years as a rental is considered to be a safe amount of time.
Okay.
what I specifically tell agents, especially, is if your clients are have owned a property less than a year
Mhm.
and they're wanting to do an exchange, make sure they're getting good tax advice and their accountant feels that they can justify it and defend them should the IRS audit.
Okay. And you mentioned, I think that was a really good point about the people who have family that are not paying market rate rent. And I think that, so if somebody realizes that they needed to do that and they needed to now try to convert it or get up to speed, then they would basically have to raise the rent and go about 2 years, do you think? Or how long of a,
Again,
how
the
do you
tax
solve
code,
that?
the IRS doesn't give the specific guidelines about that. Most accountants I talk to
Mhm.
like to see it on at least 2 tax returns.
Okay.
But again, that's between you and your accountant. The tax code does not give a specific amount of time how long that has to be for.
Okay. And then in terms of family relationships, it's like, can you have your cousin or your uncle, or how is that also not clear?
I mean, to be honest with you, the IRS has a few different definitions of related parties, depending on a few different factors. You know, in terms of whether you can allow your cousin to live in the property rent free or whatever. I honestly don't know how close it has to be. There's a specific section of the tax code, I believe it's 280A or something like that, that covers that more in depth. And so I'll let the accountant define family for you.
Thank you. These are questions that have come up with clients before, so I thought it might be good to get those
Absolutely,
out there.
perfect, fine. Any other questions on the chat box there with regard to like kind or these kinds of properties?
Not so far, so I
Okay,
think we're good.
all
We
right.
can continue.
So
Thanks.
there are three questions actually that always pop up in an exchange. What can I buy? How long do I have? And how much do I need to spend? We've already talked about the first one. Again, any kind of investment in real estate anywhere in the country. Second one, how long do you have? And this is really the heart of 1031 exchanges because this is the part that drives most people crazy. You need to know what you're going to buy within 45 days and close escrow within 180 days. So 45 days to identify what you're going to buy, 180 days to close escrow. Both of those clocks start the day escrow closes. Now, what does identify mean? Identify means you give us a piece of paper that says, I'm going to buy 123 Main Street. I'm going to buy 456 El Camino Real, unit number 2. Okay, it's the exact property you're buying. It's not a house in San Mateo. So now, technically, do you have to be in contract by the 45 days? Technically, no. Technically, you just given us a list of up to 3 properties that you're going to buy from. Now, if on day 46, all 3 of those properties are sold to somebody else, you're out of luck. So ideally, you are in contract by the 45 days. I always say by day 45, you're in contract, your inspections are done, your loan's approved, you are locked into a property, very solid. Now, a couple things about the 45 days. One is remember that the 45-day clock starts at the close of escrow. So the longer your escrow is, the longer before that clock starts. Secondly, I got a lot of questions during our current pandemic situation. Are there any leniency? Is the IRS allowing any kind of extensions for this? So let me kind of step back. The IRS does have the authority and exercises it very regularly to extend the deadlines, but they're only in specific areas when there is a specific natural disaster that's creating a federal disaster area. Typically, we think of an earthquake, a hurricane, a tornado. In Northern California, a couple of years ago, we saw Napa, Sonoma, Butte, Shasta counties get extensions because of the fires that were in those areas. Now, come March, everybody was panicking. Oh my God, we can't go look at property. We can't, inspectors won't go out, appraisers won't go out. How are we going to find property? And, the IRS has got to do something. And the IRS did. In early April, the IRS did provide for extensions for people who were in the middle of their exchange. The way they did the extensions, though, to be perfectly blunt, was not satisfactory. It was not nearly as long or as incorporated as it is typically when you have like an earthquake or a hurricane, et cetera. But what they did do affect is, in effect, if you sold your property sometime from late February to mid-March, you got extra time. You got all the way to July 15th to identify. So the earlier in that window you sold your property, the more time you had. However, if you're just selling your property now, or you're just listing the property now, the extensions that the IRS has provided have expired. If you close escrow after June 1st, then essentially the extensions that the IRS has provided will not help you. Is it possible the IRS will issue more extensions? It's possible. I'm not going to count on it. As a few of us were discussing at the beginning of before this presentation started, there are lots of parts of the economy that have opened up, quote unquote, like Oregon we're talking about, and other places. And I think the pressure is off the IRS. So while technically we still may get some extensions, I personally don't think it's going to happen. So that's really where we stand with that. My suggestion is, if you're looking to do an exchange, think about the rules that we have right now, because that's probably what you're going to have to live with. So, again, 45 days to tell us what you're going to buy, 180 days to close the escrow. Yes.
Right. So I think one of the things that we've had to do sometimes is consider how easy is it going to be to get something within 45 days, or to identify within 45 days. And I've had some clients where we've had to ask for a longer close of escrow because that time clock doesn't start until then, right?
Right.
So have you seen anybody who do that, like near the end of the close of escrow or something, try to extend it out because they're afraid of that time clock going? Or
what I recommend is that you kind of ask for this up front. So especially, I mean, I think you brought this up, Gene, very, very nicely in your earlier discussion. There's very little inventory right now.
Mm-hmm.
It is still a seller's market. Mm-hmm. And while I'm not saying you can dictate terms, you could probably ask for longer escrows. I've seen a lot of 60, 75, 90-day escrows, or a 30-day escrow with an option to extend 30 days. So I have been seeing a lot more of those, absolutely. The other thing to remember is you don't have to sell your property and then start looking. I would say probably half of my clients are already in contract to buy a property by the time they sell their property. Mm-hmm. So it's perfectly okay to be in contract. All that matters is when the escrows close. As long as you're closing escrow on the one that you're selling first, you can buy the replacement property literally the next day. I will mention also, just because the question is gonna come up, there is something called a reverse exchange. I'm not gonna get into it in depth today. If you want to know more about it, call me, I'll walk you through it. A reverse exchange is exactly what it sounds like. It's where you're actually buying your property and then selling yours. Right now, we're doing a lot of these, if only because, as you mentioned, Gene, people are really afraid of not finding a replacement property. So these are very popular right now. They are much more expensive. It requires you to have the money to go buy the property. We need to be involved very early in the transaction, but it is possible. So if you have a situation where you think you might want to buy first and then sell, call me. We can go over it. But so it does exist. But again, I could literally spend a half hour just talking about that, and I'm not going to do that today.
Okay, we actually have a couple questions on. So from Bella, I'm not quite understanding. It's how long a close can you go for if you have the 45-day rule, and close of escrow itself, the timeline doesn't, that's just up to negotiation. That 45-day doesn't start until the close. And then Chris, if I'm not answering your question well, please feel free to either chat again or you can unmute yourself. And then Chris had a question, isn't there a way to prepare so as to not need to extend escrow? And I'm not quite sure of that one either. I think, as Ron mentioned, I've had clients who start looking for their replacement property well in advance, and sometimes almost wait until they get an offer accepted before because in our market, we know that we can, for me, it was 0 days on market. But in general, we know probably within a week or two, and if you price it well, we're pretty sure we're going to be able to sell. So we're not worried about that. Go ahead and look for the property first. And then if you have a good idea or even get into contract, then at that point you can go ahead and sell the house. So that's how I've handled it. I'm not sure if that's answering your question, or maybe Ron has some additional thoughts.
No, I think your point, Gene, is right on. You're definitely at minimum, by the time you get your property into contract, contingencies are removed, get out there, start looking, so that hopefully, again, you can be in contract before you even sell your property. The other part of it is, though, especially if you're looking for replacement property in other markets, I see this very regularly where people are buying property in places like Hawaii or Oregon, where the buyers or the sellers of those properties are willing to accept contingent offers. And so if you're going to go buy a property and the buyer's willing to wait 60 days because your property is just hit the market and ready to to hit the listings, then you may have that opportunity also. Again, it's perfectly okay to be in contract as long as one that you're selling first closes. Then we can close escrow on the replacement pretty much right away after.